make me feel about 18 stone. How did you get started? I mean, every...
It's like a fairy tale, but it's true. I was discovered hanging out in Covent Garden.
I don't believe a word of it.
Yeah, I just didn't want to go home, and I was hanging out with my school friends, and a lady called Beth came up to me and gave me a card and said, "Do you want to be a model?" And I said, "Yeah."
The year is 1998. Naomi Campbell had already established herself as a supermodel and one of the 5 major fashion global modeling superstars, affectionately named The Five, which included Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, Tatiana Petitz, and Christy Turlington. Eventually, the elite club was expanded to the 6 to include Kate Moss. By 1998, Naomi was already almost a decade into the fashion biz and expanding into writing, acting, and music careers. Within that almost decade in the business, Naomi had already made history as the first Black model to appear on the cover of French Vogue in 1989. She was the co-owner of the fashion cafe with fellow supermodels Elle Macpherson, Claudia Schiffer, and Christy Turlington. She had become the honorable granddaughter of activism icon Nelson Mandela, appeared in Vanilla Ice's critically unacclaimed film Cool as Ice, appeared in Madonna's infamous sex book in 1992, briefly fired from her agency Elite in 1993, where the executive at the agency described her as a manipulative, scheming, rude, and impossible little madam who was treating us and our clients like dirt, end quote. The very owner of Elite, John Casablancas, had also commented that Naomi had been having people around her in tears. That didn't stop her career, as she was snapped up by the Ford agency the following day, and she would later tell the media that she wasn't fired but had walked out from Elite. Naomi was also dropped as a spokesperson from an animal rights group for wearing fur on the runway. She went on to release an album, Baby Woman, in 1994, which was critically panned. She had already appeared in projects for Quest for Fire, Pink Floyd, Bob Marley, and with film credits including Ready to Wear and Tu Wong Fu under her styling belt.
Yeah, I would, and I've been doing stuff in Cosby Show and stuff like that. Stuff that's right. I don't want to do a film or a television show that's not right and expect the model to be just like an airhead.
Yeah.
Why then are we talking about Naomi Campbell on a channel dedicated to Canada's place in high fashion and the personal lives, both on and off the clock, of Canadian models and designers? Well, by the late 1990s, Naomi had already established herself with a reputation as a wild child who was excellent at her job, but a little bit of a rebel without a cause. The incident we are about to discuss, the infamous hotel room incident, causing Naomi's then personal assistant to file charges against her for allegedly assaulting her with a phone, was one of the incidents that crystallized that narrative. It was the genesis of Naomi the Bad Girl. Well, the story has some critical Canadian ties. It started at the Four Seasons in Toronto, and the personal assistant was Canadian. What was going on in Naomi's life at the beginning of 1998? At the beginning of 1998, at 27 years old, Naomi was the January cover girl for Vogue UK, one of many at that point in her career, and Naomi was well on her way to entering semi-retirement as she planned to transition to other projects. In October of 1998, Naomi Campbell had already been in Toronto on and off for months to play a role for, at the time, a yet-to-be-titled film, later titled Prisoner of Love. While filming in Toronto, off-duty, Naomi was often seen out and about with her close friend at the time, Michael Budman, co-founder of emblematic Canadian sports and leisure label Roots. When she subsequently sat down for an interview with a local paper and confronted about a New York Post story, she had told the reporter she was here to work. Prior to her visit in the Great White North, the New York Post had published a story that Naomi had given Canada the big chill. According to sources quoted in the New York Post article, Naomi's holier-than-thou attitude while filming in Canada alienated those around her. Furthermore, according to the same article, other witnesses had seen on many occasions Naomi smoking in the non-smoking areas of the Four Seasons in Toronto where she was staying, and that she was constantly throwing temper tantrums on set. But when Naomi was confronted about these reports in that sit-down interview, she blew off the story as BS and that it was in fact her choice that the movie be filmed in Canada, saying, "I chose to shoot here and I chose to come here. And hey, this is Linda's town," referring to famed fellow Canadian supermodel and friend Linda Evangelista. Naomi's own manager at the time, Darius Hatcher, had also balked at the rumors that Naomi's attitude while in Toronto was getting out of hand. Hatcher told reporters that she had been by Naomi's side the entire time. The Four Seasons staff loved her, and she was going to seek a retraction from the Post. Little did the public know at the time of the interview, in the previous month of September, Georgina Galanis, Naomi's personal assistant, who was then 38 years old, would later come out with charges regarding Naomi. Galanis claimed that on September 9, 1998, Naomi assaulted her and caused bodily harm while in her room at the Four Seasons. Georgina Galanis, who was from a small town in Ontario, was a resident of Long Island, New York, when she accepted a position as Naomi Campbell's personal assistant beginning on September 1, 1998, earning about $180 per day, almost $300 per day in today's money. Part of her duties was to accompany Naomi to Toronto while she was filming Prisoner of Love. By the time the movie was finished, rumors about Naomi's chronic tardiness, rudeness, and complaining started to circulate to the media. She was just Naomi's assistant for about a week before she was abruptly let go. A few months later, Galanis filed charges against Naomi in Toronto. The police report detailed a horrifying pattern of assault. Galanis claims that somewhere between September 8th and September 9th of that year, while in Naomi's hotel room at the Four Seasons Toronto performing her work duties, Naomi violently struck Galanis twice in the head with a telephone while grabbing her by the neck, violently shaking her head, striking her in the neck, slamming her against a wall, during which she suffered severe injuries. Prior to the event, Galanis stated in her report that within that same week, while she was trying to carry out her job duties while riding with Naomi in a car on a busy highway, Naomi continuously lunged at her and threatened to throw her out of the car while it was still moving. Galanis claimed that Naomi verbally abused her, threatened to have her deported, and ruined Galanis' clothes. In order to defend herself after Galanis brought these allegations, Naomi hired well-respected and high-priced Toronto-based criminal defense lawyer Brian Greenspan. In the first week of December of '98, Naomi arrived back in Toronto, this time for less glamorous reasons. She was in town to be formally arraigned for assault causing bodily harm. Her and her legal team managed to discreetly arrive at downtown Toronto's 52 Division without encountering paparazzi. The Toronto police had prearranged the meeting with Naomi through her Toronto lawyer. She was described as arriving at the precinct wearing a modest sweater and a pair of pants, and displayed mild amusement as officers walked her through the fingerprinting and booking procedure. She was fingerprinted and had her mugshot taken. She was then booked for a court appearance later that week and released on her own recognizance, also known as bail. Naomi had already left when news broke that she was going to be arrested when she was in town. Later that day, her lawyer told reporters that Naomi had been in good spirits, friendly with zero animosity, and cooperative. He also mentioned that Naomi had never been inside a police station before, despite the fact that she had previously played an undercover New York detective in the made-for-TV series New York Undercover, adding that although she was arraigned, she would have her day in court. At one point, when he was asked if his client had looked glamorous despite her casual attire, he reacted with a chuckle, saying, "It's hard for her not to." Galanis had already sued Naomi and her company, London Kilt Inc., through which Galanis was employed, in civil court in Manhattan at the New York State Supreme Court months earlier in October 98, seeking $8 million in damages. This was before Naomi had traveled to Toronto to be officially charged with assault that December. Galanis claimed that in addition to being assaulted by Naomi, she had not been paid for that traumatic week's work, and she had been placed in a hostile work environment. Galanis wanted millions of dollars in the civil complaint for the mental and physical suffering she endured. One of Naomi's lawyers in the New York case, Marcia Horowitz, responded by describing the lawsuit as the activities of a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for unsatisfactory performance after just 1 week, and that Ms. Campbell intends to vigorously defend herself against the charges. Naomi was once cited as claiming that she would defend herself against the assault charge with her bare hands and teeth. At the time, Naomi was facing 6 to 18 months in prison if she had been convicted. During the court disposition, Naomi expressed remorse for grabbing Galanis by the throat, punching and hitting her with a telephone in their suite at the Four Seasons Toronto. Naomi offered that the rage that she directed at Galanis at the time was a result of her schedule being disrupted by a delay at Canada Customs. The court heard that as a result of the attack, Galanis suffered a gash at her scalp that was bleeding but had not required stitches, and that she had fled the attack in tears, begging the hotel staff to get her out of there. By the time the Toronto court disposition had taken place, Galanis had already settled the civil suit she filed against Naomi in New York for an undisclosed amount under a confidentiality agreement. There was public outrage at Naomi for being allowed not to attend the disposition in person and not receiving a charge or a record due to her fame and wealth. Naomi pled long distance over the phone, which took place in an Ontario courtroom. Naomi didn't have to appear in court or even have to travel back to Canada as a result of an arrangement between the prosecution crown attorney, Calvin Barry, and her very own lawyer, Brian Greenspan. The matter was settled without Naomi receiving a criminal record because there wasn't technically a criminal conviction. As a result of the plea, the charge was basically expunged from her record in Canada. Brian Greenspan responded that if it had been the case that Naomi received special treatment, the charges against her would have been dissolved months prior with a peace bond, and that going to trial would have cost Canadian taxpayers. The Crown prosecution uttered the same conclusion in subsequent reports in response to similar public outcry, saying the incident was not serious enough to be an indictable offense. Brian Greenspan added that the plea deal allowed Naomi to acknowledge what occurred but without criminal stigma attached, adding that Naomi was allowed not to attend in person out of concern for her security. After the conclusion of both court cases, Naomi would be accused again in later years by subsequent assistants for similar behavior. Although the 1990s seems so long ago, a biographer of Naomi once said of the gritty London neighborhood where Naomi had grown up as a child, "You can take the girl out of Streatham, but you can't take Streatham out of the girl." In retrospect, Naomi's reputation for being egotistical, violent, and cantankerous almost seems like a blur these days. Naomi has since devoted her time to countless philanthropic causes. Now in her 50s, she has become a mother and still dominates the catwalk. The late Vogue editor and fashion industry icon Andre Leon Talley once said of Naomi, "There is no other body, there is no other pair of legs, there is no other tenacity, there's nobody who can walk like her in a show."